We are so excited to have you here. This is our 5th year doing Words and Pictures and our 2nd doing it online. Thank you, pandemic. I am Amy Scott, the Program Services Coordinator for the Fort Vancouver Regional Library. And I am joined by Mary Obler, who is our Deputy Director and the former Cascade Park Manager and the person who organized Words and Pictures and will be moderating this session. Thank you, Mary. Just a few housekeeping things other than recording. Please keep yourself muted while others are speaking. Feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll monitor them and ask them at the end. Of course, if one of our speakers asks you for questions, you can feel free to unmute at that time and ask a question. We have 2 authors this hour, Jessica Becker and Jim Mockford. We'll start with Jessica Becker, who is a hiker, outdoor educator, and homeschooling mother. She published 3 local hiking guides for families and is currently working on a 4th for the Columbia River Gorge. Jessica makes hiking accessible to families and also educates them about various trail-specific topics through place-based learning. She has taken countless families out into nature and has learned how to make hiking with kids safe and fun for all ages. She volunteers on the board of directors for TreeSong Nature Awareness Center and lives with her family in the Cascade foothills near Battleground. Thank you so much for being with us, Jessica.
Thank you. Just a quick correction. My last name is Becker, so Jessica Becker. Moving forward. That's okay.
What did you say?
You said Baker.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Jessica Baker.
Baker. I've heard Baker.
I apologize.
Oh, you're fine. So yes, I am a mom. I'm a homeschooler. I am a hiker. I moved here from Florida 14 years ago to hike out here, and then as soon as I had my kiddo, I started sharing that with her, and people kind of identified me as the person to ask if they ever wanted to know about a trail. And so I started writing hiking books. And so my first book is Little Feet Hiking, and I published it in 2018. And it's 25 hikes around Vancouver, up into the Gifford Pinchot and Mount St. Helens. And then I wrote a second book with 30 more hikes in the same general area. They also include gorge hikes. And then I noticed that there were not a lot of kid-friendly hikes talked about or spoken about Mount Hood, and I found 45. And so this one has been really popular, and I'm currently working on a gorge book that will have 40 to 50 hikes, depending on how much time after my kid goes to bed I have to write. So the first thing I wanted to do was talk about something sensory, something called owl eyes. And so when I go out into the woods and I go hiking, I notice a lot around me, and people often comment, hey, you know, how did you see that mushroom out of the corner of your eye? Or how did you notice that that tree was bent since the last time you came? And so there's a practice that a lot of people use called owl eyes. And so owls are masters of stillness and awareness. And as parents with children or just children, stillness is not something we have a lot of in our lives, but it's still something that we can adapt to our day-to-day and then when we're out on the trail. So, so they have very wide eyes and they can see out of all sides of their eyes. And so there's things that we can do to practice that skill so that we can see things out of the corner of our eyes. And so what I'd like for everybody to do is stick your finger in front of your face and focus on your finger. And then just take a few minutes or a few 30 seconds and just see what you can identify outside of the corner of your vision. You could even wiggle your hands out here and you're still looking at your finger, right? But you can see your fingers wiggling around and you can play with it up here and like this is outside my vision, but gosh, I can see this and I can see down here. And so the more that you practice that at home when you're still, you can take that out onto the trail and you can start noticing all the things around you that you wouldn't maybe already notice. So yesterday I was hiking on a trail with my family up in the Gifford Pinchot. And I was just walking along with my dog and out of the corner of my eye, I saw where a tree had been scratched or something. And so we went and we investigated and we found out that it was where a porcupine had been peeling away the bark and eating the cambium layer. And so these are the types of things that you can notice just by creating awareness. And so you can practice that at home and then on the trail, and you can notice so much more. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, well, I recommend that all of you try that at home, and it will probably increase your awareness of all sorts of things, not just trail matters. I'd like to share my screen with you and go through a little presentation I have, if I can figure out how to do it. All right. Okay, so these are my fall hiking recommendations. Obviously, we're in fall. This weekend, we're going to have some major weather moving in and drop the snow levels. You've probably noticed that some of the leaves have already started to change. This is one of my favorite times to live in the Northwest, because growing up in Florida, we really didn't have seasons. So let's go to the next. So what can you see in fall with your owl eyes? So one thing that you can see are seeds. So all of the plants are starting to drop their seeds so that they can create new life come spring. And the more you look, the more seeds you can find. Seeds that blow in the wind, seeds that get caught on your dog, seeds that get eaten up by an animal and then get pooped out. So we found a ton of coyote scat yesterday that was full of all types of berries and seeds. And, you know, one of my daughter actually picked up a stick so she could poke in it, and then she wanted to put the stick back in her backpack. And we're like, no, you need a new stick every time. That's a good lesson. Another thing you can find are mushrooms. We have a no touch policy with mushrooms. We touch them with a stick, we take pictures, we look at them, but unless you can truly identify a mushroom correctly, which most children cannot, we just look at them and we draw them sometimes in our nature journals. But there's tons of mushrooms that are a lot of fun right now. One thing we can notice in fall are the shorter days. So it's darker earlier, and the sun's at a different angle in the sky, and it can create some different colors that you might not normally see in the summertime. So that's a lot of fun. Animals busily getting ready for winter. I don't know if you've ever walked along a trail this time of year and you've seen a squirrel midden, which is where they've like peeled all the seeds out of their fir cones, and they've left just kind of the pieces of fir cones laying there. And so that could be a squirrel midden, where they've been stocking up and stashing squirrels throughout the woods, and maybe they'll find them, or maybe those seeds will become a tree in the springtime. Birds migrating. I'm sure you've seen busy groups of birds flying all over the place, and then geese flying, they should be flying south, but sometimes they go east, sometimes they go west, sometimes I don't know where they're going, but they're everywhere. And then leaves changing on our deciduous plants and trees. So we've got all different colors right now. The vine maple is probably pretty past peak, above 3,000 feet, all the reds and the oranges. And then we're moving into the lower elevation deciduous trees like the big leaf maples and alders starting to turn yellow, and those are going to be peaking in the next few weeks, and it'll be really fun. Does anybody else have any fun things that you see in the fall that you like to notice? All right. Well, so I would like to recommend that everybody find a trail near them that they can visit in every season, because it's quite magical to see how a place changes from season to season, but also to see the similarities between each fall. And sometimes there's differences too. Different animals move in, different plants move in. So it's a lot of fun. So how do we hike in the fall? Well, the first thing we do is we bring extra warm clothing and extra waterproof clothing, because sometimes you get stuck in a hailstorm, sometimes there's a downpour, sometimes it's just a lot colder than you expected. So that's a great rule of thumb, to always bring extra clothes, but especially warm and waterproof clothing when you're going out in the fall. There's also various hunting seasons that have started last month, and they go through the end of the year for different types of animals. And so as hikers, it's our job to help protect ourselves. And so we can wear bright colors during hiking season. I also say to make lots of noise, but we don't have a lot of problem with that in my house, making noise on the trail. So I didn't think I needed to mention it. Also, know what time the sun sets. The sun is setting like around 7 o'clock or something, and that's several hours earlier than it was a few months ago. And so you can plan your day accordingly based on when the sun is setting, so that you don't have to hike out in the nighttime. I don't know if you've ever had to do that with a kid, but it's not fun. So always pack your 10 essentials. My books, at the very beginning of my books, they're just loaded with information on how to hike with kids and how to do it safely. But I always talk about the 10 essentials and just tell somebody where you're going, because as soon as you lose cell reception, you lose a connection to the outside world. And so it's always good for somebody to know, especially if snow's in the forecast, or you might get stranded somewhere due to a flash flood or something like that. So does anyone have any questions about that? Let's see, how am I for time? About 15 more minutes. Okay. So I'd like to tell you about a few of my favorite hikes in this area in Southwest Washington and around the Mount Hood area for the fall. So my first is a favorite of mine. It's a short 1 mile loop. It's at Lucia Falls Regional Park, kind of outside of Battleground. And it's a great place to see the big leaf maples. You can see my daughter holding this really giant leaf on the screen. And those will be peaking this month and into early November. And then you've also got the Fall Salmon Run. And so this is a photo I took in the middle here of a fish jumping the falls. And so I've never really seen salmon spawning here per se, but I've seen them jump the falls. And it's quite fun to just stand there and watch, because if you blink, you could miss them. But then when you finally see one, you're all cheering. You're like, I found a fish. And then eventually they make it over, and it's them kind of completing their life cycle. And actually this one is in Little Feet Hiking 1, and in the hike description for Lucia Falls, I talk all about the salmon run and why they jump and how to find out more information. I don't know if my book is in the screen. So my next one is Placid Lake, and we were just here a few weeks ago, and these photos were taken just a few weeks ago, and you can see the vine maple and the huckleberry and the blueberry bushes were they're kind of peaking, but this is a great place around 4,000 feet to take in fall colors, enjoy the still, quiet, kind of warm sun, but also cool breezes. And there's some amazing mushrooms on this trail, purple and orange and yellow and brown. This one's going to be covered up in snow over the next few days, but I bet some of it'll melt and you can still get up there through the middle of October at least. Seems like an early snow year this year. And this one's in Little Feet Hiking too. This one is outside of cell service. It's further away, but as long as you have a good paper map and a good set of directions like you have in my book, you'll be able to find your way pretty easily. The next one I have is Whipple Creek. It's Whipple Creek Regional Park in Vancouver, or I guess it's Ridgefield, right off the interstate. And this one is one of my favorites for late October, early November. It's always foggy in there in the wintertime, it seems like, and it has this kind of spooky charm, especially with this old stone mill that the Friends of Whipple Creek are rehabilitating. So if you love big leaf maple leaves and fall colors, this is a great one to go to. There's no fee to park. There's self-service. Quite often you can see horses. So that's one thing to note, that if you have a dog that is reactive to horses, or your kiddo is scared of horses, this is a place maybe you might not want to go. But it's a great local place to get in a few miles. Even just walking into the woods, you can feel your blood pressure go down. So it's a favorite. The Vancouver Lake North Trail. Now this is one that some people might not know about, because you go to Vancouver Lake and you see the picnic shelters and the playgrounds and you see the lake. But if you go towards the lake and you take a left and you walk down the gravel path, you'll come to this Vancouver Lake North Trail that was built not too long ago by the Washington Trails Association. And it is covered in black cottonwood trees, which is something that tends to grow in riparian areas. So you're not going to find it up high in the elevation or up in up where you don't have like these low elevation streams. And these cottonwood leaves, they're kind of heart-shaped, and they turn all different kinds of yellow and red. And it's hard to get through this hike because there's so much to climb on and there's so many leaves to play with. Just running through a pile of leaves, this one could be an all-day adventure. So this one, you have to pay for the regional parks fee if you start in one place, but there's other places I tell you about in the book where you can park for free and also make the trip a little shorter. And please stop me if you have any questions or want to tell me about something. So Thomas Lake is up there very close to Placid Lake. And this one tends to be a little bit busier than Placid Lake, but it's just as beautiful. It's about a half-mile walk to get to the first lake, and then you just continue to hit lake after lake after lake. And this is one that I've been taking my daughter to year after year, just because it's so accessible and so beautiful. And as you can see that there's all different vibrant colors up there. And again, you can get up there. Snow level is going to be dropping to about 500 feet below this area this weekend. So you may have to wait a week or so for it to melt out before you can get up there, or you can put your snow tires on and go up there and have a little adventure. We've been up there in the falling snow, and it makes it really pleasant because you're kind of the only one around, and you have snowflakes everywhere. Let's see. So Bluff Mountain Trail. So this one, I actually, I did this one yesterday with my family. Some of these photos, my daughter's 7, so some of these photos are from when she was probably 3. We've been taking her up there since she could walk. And it's an old road. Sometimes there's a truck on it, but usually there's not. And it takes you along this ridge line just to these amazing vistas of Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, Mount Adams. And it's one of my go-tos for seeing the fall colors and just feeling like you're on top of the world. Now this one requires a little bit of heavier duty driving. A passenger car could get there slowly, but you definitely want good tires on it, and you don't want to go too quickly. And you'd want to be comfortable with backing up on a narrow ridge line in case you came up on another car, which happened to us yesterday. And let's see. So June Lake is up on the south side of Mount St. Helens, and it's super accessible. It's paved all the way up there. It's just past Ape Cave, and it's not too steep. It's a 2.8 mile out and back, and the vine maples are really great in October, and the mushrooms are fantastic up there. And then you can sometimes find cute little newts in the lake there this time of year. Sometimes they've already gone. I really have no idea where they go. But you have this really great view of Mount St. Helens at the beginning. And then there's a really cool lava field at the lake that you can climb on. So this is kind of a quintessential, easy to get to fall hike for all families. And this hike is at Mount Hood. You've probably heard of it, Tamawanas Falls. I recommend it on a weekday if you can pull it off, or early in the morning on a weekend. It can get quite busy. This one is a little bit more challenging. So it's got some rocks to climb through, and some steeper ascents, and a couple of cliffs that are can be a bit scary with younger ones. But there's always really bright vine maple, and then the waterfall turnaround point is a really great one. And this one, even people snowshoe to in the winter. So if that's your thing, you could try that one out for some winter fun. And this one is one that the PCT North from Lolo Pass. Now this is one you won't find in a hiking book for kids. This is one where I said, okay, the PCT is flat-ish, and I backpacked this years ago, and I think it's kid friendly, so we're just going to go check it out. And we did that last year, and it turned out to be a really great kids hike that had views of Mount Adams and views of Mount Hood, and lots of vine maple changing, and even these cute little animals called pikas that live in the rock fields. And they look like mice, but they're related to rabbits. And they just called back and forth to us because we were the only ones there. So if you're looking for some solitude, a little bit of adventure, the road's not too bad to get there. But this one is a really great one to visit. I would say late spring, early summer through the fall, but it's especially nice in the fall because the colors are just so golden and so red, and the air is so crisp up there. And that's it for my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? I don't know how to undo my screen share. There we go.
We did have a few questions in the chat. The first was, how do you encourage your kids to be more observant in nature?
Well, I think the best thing you can do as a parent is just get excited yourself. The more excited you are, the more excited they'll get. If you go, oh, wow, look at this mushroom, look at the colors, look at the textures, and you get down at their level and you start to look at it, they're going to model that behavior. And the more you do it, the more that they're going to do it. And so I don't have to encourage my 7-year-old to poke coyote poo with a stick, because she's just so interested what's in there, because we've modeled, we love to animal track in our family. And you can learn a lot about an animal by its poo. And so it's just something we've done so many times that now she does it. And so I would just say getting excited yourself about it, and then learning what's ahead on the trail, right? So like by reading my books, I tell you, hey, if you go around this corner, there's gonna be a really cool log. And so you can get them excited about the log. And then when you get there, bring out a magnifying glass and start to investigate it. And again, get on your level. That's my biggest recommendation. What's next?
I have a question. Do your books tell us what trails allow dogs and which don't?
I do. Most
Great.
of them seem to. There's only a few that, we're a dog family, so we try to avoid trails where we can't take her, but I do point that out where they are required on leash and whether or not they're not allowed at all.
Great, thanks.
So I have a question, less about the hiking and more about you as a writer. I'm curious to know, like, what encouraged you to just get out there and write a book like this? I mean, a lot of us do something that's kind of more of a hobby, but what made you think that you wanted to put it into a book and get it published?
So, so before I had children, my husband and I ran our own hiking group. And like I've said in the introduction, I was always kind of known as the person who knew where all the hikes were. I kind of made it like a hobby to know where all the cool hikes are and then go do them. And then I have a master's in business. I did corporate strategy before this. So when I was a stay-at-home mom, I just was going a little stir crazy. I needed something to do. And so I was taking my daughter out hiking because I love it so much and it seemed to make her feel better. I'm not quite sure what the impetus was for it, but I think it was very clear to me that there was a need for it, because I would go online and I would say, well, does anyone have any hiking recommendations for me to take my 2-year-old? And it was always the same 5 hikes, and I like novelty. So I figured that maybe other people might like novelty too. And I did help run my local chapter for Hike It Baby for a few years. And so that also kind of gave me some encouragement, knowing so many families and what they were looking for. And then my husband is a self-published or an independently published fiction writer. So he did all the hard stuff in figuring out how to do it. And I just piggybacked on that.
I have another question.
Okay.
What are you working on now? Do you have anything coming up? I think you said you just published your 3rd book. Is that right?
I published the Mount Hood book in April. April seems to be the month I publish things. I don't know. There must be something about winter and being a native Floridian that I get stuff done in the wintertime. But so I have done all my scouting for my Columbia River Gorge book. Again, it's been, people asking on local Facebook groups or Instagram, where can I hike with my kids in the gorge? And it's the same crowded trails, and trails are crowded or more crowded than ever due to the pandemic. And I've had to get a little creative in finding trails that are less busy, but I have found some. So I'm excited to start writing the book for the Columbia River Gorge, and I'm hoping to have that published in April. And then I have lots of ideas for future books. And again, it's just time constraints, trying to homeschool a 7-year-old. As the kids get older, the work gets harder, and it's harder to make time to go out and hike and write books. So you just have to stay tuned.
All right. Well, we've placed links in the chat for purchasing your book, as well as a link for getting your book at the library. Is there anywhere else that folks can follow you? Do you blog or anything like that?
I am a bit of a, I don't know, I want to say I'm a technophobe, but I'm a paper and pencil kind of person. So I'd love to start doing in-person hikes at some point. I did that before the pandemic, but the best place to follow me is on Facebook or on Instagram. And I have a website, but I haven't made the time to improve it. So it's very modest, like me. I'm open. People are always emailing me, asking me advice on where to hike, and I'm happy to answer questions. So anyone can email me at littlefeethiking@gmail.com or send me a message on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction for something.
I have one more question before we finish. You mentioned having good paper maps. Do you have a particular kind of map that you like to use for a service or anything like that, or just a regular map that you'd get at a gas station?
Well, it would take me all day to probably go through all of my maps that I have, but I used to use Green Trails maps, but I have found that they aren't as accurate just because they haven't been updated in a long time. I've been really impressed with the National Geographic maps that they've been putting out lately, and they're a nice like waterproof material and they fold up easily. I have many maps that are held together with packing tape because they've just been used so much and they're made out of just paper. And then WTA, the Washington Trails Association, and OregonHikers.org always have really great directions. And quite often they have really good topographic maps that of an area that you can download. I did not put very good maps into my book because I can't do any better than what the official map makers have done. I would advise people to not follow free online places like All Trails or any of the other like Gaia and all those without having a backup paper map, because quite often you go out into the woods and you don't have internet service anymore, or if somebody may have put the information in incorrectly. So those National Geographic maps are really great. I like those. And you can always download one from the Forest Service. It's just more tedious and they don't have the mileages on them, and it's just easier to just have a really quick giant map you can take wherever you're going, because sometimes you get somewhere and the parking lot's full and you have to pull out my book and pick another hike, which has happened to some of my friends. And then if you have a map of the whole area, you don't have to worry about being exposed to not having a map. So
great advice. Thank you so much. No, that's great advice. It's always good to have a map. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. And
you're welcome.
we're thrilled to have you. We have your books in the library. So yeah, Mary put in links to the library and to buy them so you can take them along with you. So we're going to move on to Jim Mockford. I got the name right. Yes, Mockford. That was Jessica Becker. Jessica Becker. Okay.
Wonderful.
So now Jim Mockford is the author of The Kite That Touched the Sky, a bilingual Chinese and English illustrated children's book published in 2020. Jim is a historian and writer specializing in Asian and Pacific studies. He attended Waseda University in Tokyo and graduated from the University of Washington. He is an award-winning kite flyer at the 1987 Weifang International Kite Festival in Weifang, China. And in 2017, he returned to Weifang to fly kites in China once again and began to write a children's book about his grandchildren in China and the USA and their adventure together flying kites. Jim, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for pairing me with Jessica, because I loved her exercise with peripheral vision, right? And the owl eyes, because you never know who's got a kite that might look like an owl or a hawk. And it gets us thinking about how animals perceive the environment when we practice things like the owl eyes exercise that Jessica showed us. And I fly this kite on occasion. I didn't know I was going to use it for this story, but it's a nice segue from her story about hiking to mine. And I did a little hike this morning. I'm coming to you from Seabrook, Washington, which is on the Washington coast. And I did a little hike down a trail to the beach this morning where kites were flying on the beach. So it was nice beginning of my day. And then you got my name right, but I did actually graduate from the University of Oregon, and then I went to the University of Washington. So my Oregon Duck followers will want to make sure that I made mention of that. And we were happy to be mentioned. Our book was mentioned in Oregon Quarterly this summer, the summer issue, when they do that section about alumni publishing and alumni authors and that. I haven't gone to the Huskies, but I actually studied Chinese at the University of Washington years ago. And my book is a bilingual Chinese and English illustrated children's book because my grandson, Jason, was born in China 4 years ago, and my granddaughter, Emily, in Vancouver, Washington. So I began to think about how to write a book for my grandchildren in 2 different countries. And they got to fortunately travel back and forth and meet each other and have some adventures prior to COVID. So the story all takes place prior to COVID. And then we just happened to be published during 2020, at which time Emily had another baby brother born in Vancouver in October. So Noah's now 2 years old. And Jason had a baby brother born in China during the middle of COVID with masks on at the hospital and all sorts of drama, which we were quite concerned about. So this book takes place prior to all those kinds of worries. But we are being read both in Mandarin by native speakers or American speakers of Chinese, as well as English. And today I was going to read my book, in English for you all. And I just want to say we did a Zoom or actually Google chat to Martin Luther King Chinese Immersion Program earlier this week, where this book talk was piped into 5 classrooms. And I couldn't quite see the faces because it's a camera that just has the entire classroom and not close-ups. So one of the tricks I do when I don't have people right in front of me is to bring a friend to listen to my book talk. And my friend today is a Chinese dragon kite. And dragon kites, of course, are popular in China. As you see some other kites, the hula girl also appears in the book, turtle kites, animal kites. And it's not just a puppet, there's a whole trail of tail here that you can fly this kite with, which it has been flown. So for those of you watching and want an activity to do while you're listening to my book talk, when you see a picture of an animal or a kite, you might try and draw some round circles for eyes on your paper and a squarish mouth with some teeth like your pumpkin for Halloween, and some other details relating to what you see as I'm reading the book. So I'm going to go through this because it's The Kite That Touched the Sky. Co-author, my daughter, Jenny Farmer, it lives in Vancouver, Washington. And our illustrator is Teresa Johnson, who is known for her illustrations of Rojo the Llama books. And she lives in Vancouver. And Rojo's owner, Shannon, are longtime friends with my daughter. So when we thought about how to illustrate a book about kites, we thought, well, kites are often just animals flying in the sky. And Teresa really can draw some great animals like she did for Rojo the Llama. So we kindly, went forward with that idea. And she was happy enough to join us for this book, which we have dedicated to those who fly kites in our memories and those who will fly kites in the future. So this book begins with a little map. You don't have to download it from Google. It's right here. It's once upon a time in China. You see the map of China and a kite flying overhead. A baby named Jason Wang Xiao was born. And there's my son and my daughter-in-law, Lin Xiaoyu Wang Mockford, who is the translator of our book. They didn't know at the time this was happening that there would be a book forthcoming showing the story of Jason meeting his cousin Emily. But just a few months later, they had a cousin in America born as well. Well, as the book moves on, we see Jason one morning looked up from his bed and he saw something hanging from the ceiling. His father told him it was a kite. Jason stretched out his hand and he thought, Someday I will touch the kite. Let's see, I better try to do it like this. That summer, Jason's parents took him to a park. He saw many children flying kites. He dreamed, someday I will fly a kite. And there's our dragon kite that looks a lot like this one. And if you have our book, you can do a tracing of that kite and see how your Chinese dragon kite turns out. Or a turtle kite, fish kite, or any other type of animal. You can see almost any type of animal flying if you go to the Long Beach Kite Festival in the summer. Well, anyway, later that evening, far away in America, Jason's cousin was born. Her name was Emily Rose. And there's a kite over Vancouver, Washington. You have to excuse my fingers a little bit. I have sometimes a little trouble turning pages. One night, Emily looked up and saw a kite hanging above her crib. It was a gift her cousin sent her from China, her mother explained. And Emily thought, someday I will touch the kite. The next day, Emily looked out of the car window and saw a kite fluttering up in the sky, and she dreamed, someday I will fly a kite. Jason flew across the world to meet his cousin Emily. Their grandparents took them to the Kite Museum. You can ask me or tell me in chat if you've ever been to the World Kite Museum at Long Beach, Washington. That's where this illustration takes place. They saw kites from around the world. They thought, someday we will fly a kite. Does this look familiar to anybody? Have you been there? So we're down at Long Beach, Washington, and together with their grandparents, the cousins walked outside and were surprised to see kites everywhere. It was a kite festival. Jason and Emily wondered, can we fly a kite right here? What happens next? Wow. Yes, their grandpa said, and he handed them a kite. The cousins were so excited. They were finally holding a kite, and then they released their kite into the wind. Not sure if you can see that now. There are kites above them because that's a shadow. But what do you think happened next? What's going to happen? So shall I end the story right there? Did their kite line tangle? Did their kite line break? Yes, the long line tangled and broke, but the kite didn't fly away. It fell straight into the sand. Then Jason and Emily tripped. They tripped on their way to rescue the kite. Oh no. Now they didn't know what to do. Jason and Emily cried and cried. And look at that poor kite. Boy, that needs some help. But their grandma said, don't worry, pick up the kite and try again. She fixed it. Grandma comes to the rescue a lot in these kind of situations. You notice Grandpa didn't help out. He was too busy writing the book. Well, anyway, Jason and Emily brushed off the sand, and together they tried again. Their kite caught the wind, and this time it began to rise in the sky. Okay. Their kite flew higher and higher and higher still. It was soaring above all the other children's kites. Jason and Emily's kite flew way up into the clouds until the reel was at the end of the line. Finally, their kite had touched the sky, flying into a world of kites. So that's the end of the story, but it's not the end of the book, because some additional pages after the World of Kites page have a Chinese and English glossary. We have Jason's glossary of English and Chinese words and Emily's glossary. And in some of the Chinese immersion programs, Americans who are learning Chinese can use that glossary as they study Chinese. And in China, they're studying English. So that works great for a glossary for Jason as well. And then there's some information about the authors and illustrator. And there's a link to our website. And what else is there? Oh, I think I have to show you. There's some pictures of the real Jason and Emily in China when we went to Dalian, China, the year before the pandemic. And it was our plan to go back, but we haven't been able to go back since. But we want to do this again and have more fun with kites in the future and see what kind of kites Emily and Jason want to fly. And for further information, there's a QR code, a website, kumquatkids.com, and we have a books on sale at the Port Vancouver gift shop, where we did our first and only in-person children's story time book reading this summer in July. And then all of a sudden we went back to virtual, but we did an in-person story time at Fort Vancouver at the Visitor Annex. And we have kites at the Portland Chinatown Museum on exhibit right now, a little mini kite pop-up exhibit in their gift shop where our book's on sale. And then it's also on sale at the World Kite Museum gift shop. So I'm promoting those 3 gift shops because I know libraries know where books are at, and they know bookstores, but they might not know that some gift shops carry books as well as kites for sale. And I invite you all to visit the World Kite Museum in Long Beach, Washington, which recently reopened for purchase of kites and books and other things there. So it's a great place to go if you're down at the beach. And I'm way up the coast right now, and I think my time's about out too, isn't it, Mary? Do you have time for questions? Okay, good. I haven't been looking at the chat line, but anyway, let me thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you today.
I'd like to just point out to everyone, I'm gonna put a link in the chat to our experience passes. FERL has experience passes, and you can reserve a pass to the Lansu Chinese Garden, where they have the bookshop that Jim was talking about. And
can I mention that? We had a great big Chinese kite on exhibit in 2020, one that's bigger than this. The one kite that I brought back from China in 1987 was on exhibit at Lansu, and then the entire garden had to close because of the pandemic. I went and got my kites from Lansu, brought them home, and I could not take them back. It had also closed. So I had kites like this living in my house for about 6 months. And the Lansu garden is about a block away from Portland Chinatown Museum gift shop. So I'm sure you could find great things in either place, but the Lansu gift shop moved from their usual location outside the gate to an inside the gate gift shop. So you have to actually purchase admission into Lansu to see their gift shop at all. The Portland Chinatown Museum, just a block up the street.
oh, okay.
Knock on their door, the gift shop's just to the left, and they have a selection of some other children's books as well. So I'm commenting, Portland Chinatown Museum is the place that is mentioned on our website.
Okay.
And our little mini pop-up kites, our signature kite pop-up exhibit is with the gift shop at Portland Chinatown Museum.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Until the holidays, until the end of the year.
Great. Thank you.
Pop-up will pop down.
I think Amy has some questions. Amy, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, I don't know whether you can hear me or not. I put them in the chat. I wasn't sure if my sound is working.
Amy, I so want to talk to you. Your chat line says you were at Weifang in 2005.
Yes.
Wow. So my first trip to Weifang was in 1987. And as you can imagine, it was very different there. And I went back in 2017, 30 years later. And of course, the city has grown tremendously. Yeah. And Amy, you can get in touch with me either through, you know, Mary or Amy, or whoever at this event.
Sure. I would love to.
Have my contact information. But it's also, there is a kumquat at kumquatkids.com email, but I'd certainly like to talk to you about Weifang. And actually, I was invited to go not only to Weifang again more recently, but in 2019, the director of the Wuhan Kite Festival came to Long Beach. He invited us to go to Wuhan in 2020. And of course, we couldn't do that. That became the last place anybody wanted to go in the world. But they also have a nice kite festival there, and we're friends with the people at the Wuhan Kite Festival and some other places in China where kite flying happens, as it does all over the country. So yeah, I see your chats now, and you're lucky that you have kites from Weifang at your home, because when the pandemic hit, it became more difficult to get kites from China shipped here, like pretty much everything. But you can find kites from Weifang for sale in the U.S. sometimes on eBay, or some other distributor might have kites from Weifang. For people just listening, Weifang is the world capital of kite flying. It's where kite flying originated in China over 2,000 years ago. And they have a spectacular museum there, and the annual Weifang International Kite Festival is the biggest kite flying event in the world. When I went there in '87, we probably had about 50,000 people in the stands watching the parade for the participants who walked in. And I was carrying the Washington State placard. There was a guy in front of me carrying the American flag, and we're like, it's like an Olympics of kite flying. And some people from Rhode Island and Pennsylvania, and, you know, another state or two. So Weifang was a great experience in 1987, and I thought it was great in 2017. It's just China's become incredibly modernized, and it's much easier to get around China, and it's easier to travel to Weifang now than it was in 1987, which was quite an adventure, I can tell you. So anyway, thanks for you, Amy, for your connecting on the chat line. That's great to meet you.
Thank you.
谢谢。
谢谢你. We'll get connected later.
I look forward to it. You know, and that's kind of why I like this Words and Pictures Festival. You never know who you're going to just meet through doing this. And then also when videos are posted, I've done a China chat for the Northwest China Council. It was a little bit different story, but in any case, people will kind of connect with your story and then send you an email. And the next thing you know, you have something to talk about with somebody you just met at an event. So it's great that you guys organized this event this way, Amy and Mary. Thank you.
Jim, can I ask you, how do you win an award at a kite festival?
I won my award by accident. And kites are judged based on the way they fly. And at that event, at the time, what happened was the late Kay Biesing, who passed away at the age of 86 earlier this year and was the founding director of the World Kite Museum. Well, Kay and her husband were there, and at the last minute, they wanted to fly a kite they made themselves. The rules don't specify if you buy your kite at a store or you have somebody make it for you or you make it yourself. It's only that you need to be present flying a kite, you have a number on, and the judges look at how the kite's flying in the sky, and then they determine that that is a great kite. Well, at the last minute, when Jim and Kay decided to fly their own kite, they said to me that I needed to fly this other kite that someone who couldn't go on the trip with us had sent to China because he wanted his kite flown in China. And that kite was a big Delta kite about 30 feet across. It took 3 people to launch it. And I'm left holding the string at the last minute with my number on. And the judges come by and say, Peng Jung Hao, whatever, and which, you're a good kite, you know. And it turned out that this fellow who had sent his kite had won awards at the Smithsonian for design, for kite design, for other kinds of, he was a designer. And he had created this wonderful kite, sent it off with the American delegation to the Kite Festival and just hoped that somebody would fly his kite. I ended up flying it. So then I'm awarded the kite trophy and a certificate. And I felt a little bit guilty about this. So I decided the best place for the kite itself, this trophy kite, is at the World Kite Museum in Long Beach, Washington. So that kite that I won in 1987 is on exhibit at the World Kite Museum. And then I have a certificate at home that mentions that I'm the guy that happened to be there. But there's some incredible kites at kite festivals, and they're incredible whether they win awards or not. You know, they're just all types of things going on. The rules for the international part of the festival are different than they are for Chinese kites. Obviously, Chinese have been competing, all the provinces of China have been competing at Weifang for decades. And in the 1980s, my friend David Sheckley from Seattle initiated the international dimension to this kite festival and led kite delegations to China. And when David passed away, his collection became the bulk of the World Kite Museum's collection because David had the biggest collection of Asian kites outside of Asia. So he donated over 700 fabulous kites to the World Kite Museum, and they can't exhibit all of them. Most of them are in storage, but they have great kites on exhibit down there. Thanks to David and Dorothea Checkley, who I was blessed to be able to travel in China with them in the 1980s, you know. And so they are the people that really, and Kay Biesing, of course, who's remembered. We had a good write-up in Coast Weekend magazine last month. We donated some books to the Timberland Library at Ilwaco and Ocean Park, and some other Pacific County libraries, because those are the libraries where, you know, their people see kites all the time. And we wanted to do something in memory of Kay Biesing. And so we did make a donation in her name to those libraries. So I've been having fun with libraries around the state and ones here locally in our area. And also kite people, there's kite associations that you can learn a lot more about traveling to international kite festivals, not just China, but anywhere in the world. And then sadly, because of the pandemic, people have moved to virtual events. So there were no international participants in the Weifang Kite Festival, you know, in the last year or so. Earlier, they delayed it a bit and then had it sort of locally anyway. And kite flying is a very safe activity for COVID because you're kind of apart on the beach, away from people. But in any kind of festival event, there's always food carts and group, you know, large gatherings. So they couldn't really do that. And they're looking forward to a time when they can re-invite people to come back again, you know, so we'll keep an eye on that when that is possible to do. And since I have family in China, you know, I have a place to stay and they like to go see grandpa fly kites anyway. So, so we have fun when we're in China. It's a great country to travel in. It's without a pandemic, I should say, but we can't really go much of anywhere right now. To other festivals that happen anywhere in the world. There's kite festivals all over the world, and they've been much reduced in the last year because of the pandemic situation. So that's what I've been doing during the pandemic, is writing about kite flying.
So Jim, I just got home. I want to show you the kites I got from Weifang. It's on my wall. Can you see them?
Yes, butterfly kite, fish kite.
And a dragonfly.
Yes. You know, and those kind of kites are all over in China and in Weifang, but in other cities as well, which vary a little bit by region. Thank you, Amy. Yes, those are super kites.
Do you have a collection of kites yourself?
I have a strange collection because I have kites from Japan. I've traveled in Japan quite a bit. Maybe I have kites from Thailand. I have to think about where my kites are from. I don't collect too much because it's an issue of space, and some kites are really big. But I do have some kites, and my miniature kites are on exhibit at Portland Chinatown Museum now until the end of the year. And there are some small kites that have the images of the mascots from the last Olympics in Beijing. The Beijing Olympics had, little Chinese mascots, and those are painted on the miniature kites in one set. But they had a little space in their gift shop that we put up our little kite exhibit. And I think there's pictures of that on my website and I'm on that, Kumquat Kids Productions has Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and a website. And so you can find us if you Google Kumquat Kids Productions. The name Kumquat Kids actually exists as a fellow who did a jazz music in the 1970s. And he's around, he's a great guy. We've been in touch and he lives on the East Coast, but you might run into Eddie Henderson on a Kumquat Kids song search. Unfortunately, I didn't write that song, but and there's some other similar things. There's a Kumquat festival in Florida that I'd much like to go to, but I couldn't because of the pandemic. But we're having fun with the name and our local entity and book writing. And I write in other genres not related to this at all too. So I'm kind of busy with all that sort of stuff.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jim. It's been wonderful. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We have recorded this, so if you know of someone who might be interested, let them know to check out our FERL YouTube channel in the next few days after we get it posted. And don't forget to buy books from our authors at Vintage Books. They have a website at vintage-books.net. And we have coming up our keynote speaker will be coming up at 3:30. So check your schedule for words and pictures.